you check the children? Show a little match sometimes.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes. That is what
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Greetings, Fright fans, and welcome to the Horror Show. I'm Jaime and Fuego, and returning for another solo review from Fantastic Fest 2025. Now, the actual in-person event takes place in Austin, Texas, but us here in the Deadly Desert, obviously Cecil, founder of the feast, and, Robert, Morgan, myself, I know Davey has been on a few reviews, so stoked to be getting to do this virtually. And this is for a film, a Polish film from director, but I just want to make sure that I do this as correctly as possible, Bartosz M. Kowalski. So, Polish film, as I mentioned, translated into English, entitled 13 Days Till Summer. And so, yeah, slasher movie slash home invasion movie, as the description entails. And so here on the Horror Show, we always like to give overall thoughts, and then we jump into story, acting, production, effects, things of that nature, score, audio design, if anything really in particular stands out in that regard. And I guess that's one of the things that I have to make mention about this film, is that from a visual standpoint, as far as like the presentation of the film, looks absolutely terrific. And thankfully, as opposed to as like yawn-inducing and just uninspired as many slasher looks go, as far as like choice of mask and things of that nature, that has something distinctive going forward as well. But not a lot else as far as really standing out from the pack. And that's one of the issues in my overall thoughts with watching so many horror movies, and slashers in particular, especially here in the modern era, is the fact that you kind of see a lot of by the numbers kind of stuff. It takes a lot to stand out from the pack in this very crowded subgenre of horror, because slashers have been, oh so popular since the late 70s, with obviously, icons going into the early 80s, like, Michael Myers and, Jason, and, all of like the heavyweights of horror over the early years of slashers. And so, as you got into things like The Burning and, things that were like more one-offs and stuff, it really does, especially now, take a lot to stand out from that proverbial pack, as I mentioned. And despite the fact that you have an ensemble in this Polish film of young actors that I think are like leaps and bounds above, at least as far as their acting capabilities go, than the ilk of underachievers we all too often see in American lower budget horror, the acting from all the kids in this is really, really strong in my estimation, like across the board. They're all developed as characters, and you have kind of that interesting angle. And then production value, as I said, the film looks great, and you can tell that they spent some money on it. Most notably, they spent some money on the musical licensing, but we'll get to that at the end of the review. But all in all, while I appreciated the dedication, I guess, and the fact that, trying to have a unique mask, trying to get enough money together to make something that doesn't look cheap, it still just felt a little bit soulless in a lot of ways, despite the slick presentation. And I mean, yeah, bunch of kids, as I will be segueing now, I guess, into that story and such, is that, yeah, there's father going out of town, bunch of kids are having a party at the girl whose father is going to be away for the weekend, and so it's her younger brother, who has just recently discovered a dead body at the very beginning of the film. And so there were a series, well, not a series of murders, but there was a wife and two daughters that were killed by a janitor at her younger brother's school the year before, anniversary of the murders. And so, yes, killer potentially out, doing some work again on the anniversary, because the kid, the younger brother, discovers a dead body out in the park. He is questioned by police, ultimately released, goes back home. His sister is having all of her friends over, with the dad being out of town for the weekend. They're drinking, they're partying, they're flirting, blasting a lot of American music, which I thought was very funny. This just the choice of music by all of these, Polish kids, like I got a good feeling, and, all this other stuff. But, yeah, then the smart home that they're living in, brother and sister, obviously, and partying in, gets all locked down. Phones get taken, they're sealed in with a killer. And is it the janitor? Could it potentially be somebody else? everybody knows that after Scream, you know, in the wake of Scream, there was always the possibility of multiple killers. I mean, who knows? And so this is a non-spoiler review. I'm not going to get into any of those details, but do all of these framing devices sound incredibly familiar? Well, that's because unfortunately there are. And as I said at the very beginning of this review, it takes a lot to stand out. And, well, I guess that's a good segue into acting, because I've really said about enough. You can probably imagine kids start getting picked off that are locked in this smart home that they can't escape from. That's about it. That's about all that I can say, as opposed to, you know, going into spoilers and revealing, you know, nature of killer and motivation and all that different stuff. But, yeah, I mean, the acting, though, as I did mention, the acting is strong in this movie. That's one of the highest points of this. Now, even if the story is relatively derivative and doesn't really do too much new, you know, anything new under the sun in that regard, the acting is good across the board. You know, the younger brother, in the fact that he is still processing, you know, finding this body, and wow, it is getting incredibly bright. There we go. But yeah, the father, it's because of the demonstrative use of the hands. But yeah, so the father, the brother, just processing everything that went down with him earlier in the day. Well, yeah, the day of they all get locked in and whatnot. Yeah, so he has that good, like, tortured element. He's written in an interesting fashion because of the fact that, yeah, he's, like, kind of a horror fan, and so, you know, he's got his, like, Jason-esque, you know, like the Friday the 13th game, running around slashing and dashing and doing all that stuff. And, you know, he's got a very cool room, actually. He's got this huge wall that is, like, almost, like, 16-bit looking, you know, with, like, this hand, like, coming up. And the kid's got a badass room, and you can tell he's into spooky stuff. And then, yeah, the final girl, which is his older sister, yeah, she's pretty, she's capable. She actually has a few very intense emotional scenes when certain characters are killed, without getting into too many details or anything of that nature. And she sells it. She sells it very well. The anguish, the aggravation, the frustration, the confusion, all of that stuff. And even they're not, like, as one note as you see in some slashers, but even her friends who are the supporting cast, you know, like what seems like her best friend who shows up. There's also a obsessive ex-girlfriend of the dude that she is currently dating. I mean, all of them are relatively fleshed out, and yeah, give capable performances that are nowhere near the annoyance that I get with a lot of stuff that, you know, comes from here in the States. And so, you know, props to them in that regard, especially, you know, nod to, I believe the character's name is Magda. She's the ex-girlfriend of the boy that our final girl is currently dating. And so that girl gives a interestingly obsessive / tortured performance when we get her in the film, despite the supporting role and everything. So, you know, she was good. Yeah, I mean, I can't fault the acting. It really does circle back to the fact that the material just doesn't really bring too much new to, although I will say in the third act, when it does get to a few reveals, you know, despite the fact that it is doing a lot of things that we have seen before, it's good, but it still isn't quite. There's a third wall break near the very, very end of the movie that I was just like, okay, you guys think you're pretty smart, huh? You know, so that's funny in that regard. But so yeah, acting is good, story, nothing unexpected, just a lot of tropes that we have seen before. And then as far as the production value goes, you know, it's slick, it's great looking, as I mentioned, but the thing is, with regards to, like, the practical effects and the kills and stuff, it does have this propensity in the movie. First and foremost, the kills are nothing inventive whatsoever, and that's where it's tough, you know, where we're all desensitized. And with the carnage candy, you know, yeah, it's like fans of slashers really want to see something unique done with the kills. And in this, you know, I did mention the mask. The mask is like you see on the poster. It's like an upside down face kind of thing going on, and so the killer can look through the eyes, but yet the face is going, you know, in the upside down direction. So I can't recall having seen that in the film. Now, it might have been done before, but I can't offhand say that I've seen that. And so props in that regard for some sort of distinctiveness in the design of your killer's mask. You know, that's one of the first things that you need, is a more distinctive and unique look, something that's less run-of-the-mill. But the kills themselves, you know, while they do an interesting stylistic thing of like little flashes of the kills, you know. Most notably, there's kind of a cheap one that I'm not going to spoil, but it's always considered cheap by a lot of people when this sort of kill happens by a lot of horror fans, and I will second that notion, but thankfully, at least initially, it's just a little flash of seeing it as opposed to it. You do eventually get to the aftermath, and that's where it looks fake, but and aside from that, the kills just aren't anything supremely unique, from the homeless guy at the very beginning to the stuff where our killer's going around with a crossbow. It's mentioned in the synopsis, so that's nothing that's really gonna take anybody off guard, is that, yeah, this killer's going around with a crossbow. So you can imagine there's only so much you can do from just a killing standpoint when somebody is just going around with a crossbow and shooting people in chest and head and whatever else. So that's nothing that's really gonna wow too many seasoned horror fans, and it's not gonna really bring as much like real goopy gore as like those just carnage hungry like sickos really want. So it's not really breaking any new ground in that regard. But I will say the design of the home, they chose for this one location a very dope looking spot. You can very much tell that this family, despite the mother having dipped out, is very, very wealthy, and they live in an incredibly nice, very modern sort of spot. And so the home looks cool. There's like even like a little pond through one particular point of it, and there is an ominousness, I guess, to these bars, these like almost like roller shield kind of things, like coming up and coming down, that turn the home into a fortress, when you're retiring for the evening and don't want anyone breaking in. Although I guess maybe in Poland, because there's so many homes that are not in like the heart of the city. If you are somewhere more remote, like this place looks like it's more or less out in the forest, I guess maybe you would want to be a little more fortified, because if you had, burglars or whatever that were coming after you, you're out in the middle of nowhere. That's why she even says at one point, the older sister, who's our final girl, she's like, yeah, the quickest we can get food delivered out here is like 2 hours. And then the younger brother's like, yeah, but there's a burger joint like 2 minutes away. So but in any event, yeah, I will praise the design of this home that they chose, and that's more so on the architect that built it than the people who just very opportunistically used it as their filming location. But nonetheless, yeah, it's slick and cool, and when everything has them locked in, it does have relative ominousness to it. But yeah, I mean, there's not really much else for me to say on this one, because you can tell I'm relatively lukewarm on it. I have to mention the music, though. They dropped a serious chunk of Skrilla on the music that was used in this movie. Most notably, there is a Righteous Brothers song, which everybody knows from Ghost, that is used. It's as a plot device, because we hear it early in the movie and then we hear it late in the movie, and it's used in kind of a montage-y, I guess, like deliberate heartstring pulling kind of thing, but you can very much tell what they're attempting to do, and I guess it works to a degree, but it also feels very heavy-handed, in the same regard. So I don't know, man. And then you also get a lot of other familiar tunes, both from the aughts, and then even a song that I recognize that's within the last like year or so. Cecil and I, because Cecil watched this with me, but he's just letting me tackle this one on my own. Yeah, they dropped a chunk on licensing all of those songs, so that's even further proof that they had money for this movie. But just to as I'm wrapping things up here, echo some of Cecil's thoughts just really, really quickly. He's like, yeah, well, taking forever to actually get to some deaths, and taking forever to, the film really takes its time. And I was like, yeah, they had a budget if they're going to license all of these songs. And he's like, yeah, those are scripting issues. Those are not, any sort of financial limitations that this film was facing. So all in all, 13 Days Till Summer, the Polish slasher that was playing at Fantastic Fest 2025, lackluster, not terrible by any means, but definitely not breaking any new ground. Nothing particularly special, despite the fact that the acting was a significant step above, and the fact that it does look good. It's a great looking movie. It's a very well acted movie. It's just the story was not anything that's going to wow you, especially as if you're a seasoned slasher fan, or just a horror aficionado in any degree. But hey, I was was at least moderately entertained here and there, and I did like the choice in Final Girl, and also the younger brother. I mean, I thought both of them, you know, were pretty strong as actors along with the rest of the ensemble. It was just like, yeah, story didn't really do too much for me, unfortunately, and that is a really key crux of this sort of film. So I extend a grande gracias to you know, Brad and the entire team that has allowed us to be virtual press for this. Yeah, Fantastic Fest 2025. It is going for a few more days until the 25th of September. In person in Austin, Texas. It's one of the biggest genre festivals in the United States, and considered with a lot of respect by, you know, a lot of other horror and just genre peeps around the rest of the world, which is why you have such a great international presence in all of the selections here. So, you know, thanks so very much once again for that. I've been Jaime and Fuego. You can find myself on all social media sectors, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, like, share, subscribe this video. Give some thoughts if you have happened to catch this one in person, or I'm not sure if it played at any other festivals beforehand, but, you know, with a decent budget like this, and with, you know, talented actors and stuff, and a cool killer design, I would imagine it's going to continue playing around the festival circuit. And so, I don't know. I mean, art is subjective, as I always say. Make up your own mind, even if I wasn't too big on this one. And Cecil, I think, was even less on this one. So, yeah, guys, also a big thanks to our patrons. You know, thank you so very much for all of the continued support after all of these years on the horror show. But that's going to wrap it up for my thoughts on 13 Days Till Summer, a title that, in my estimation, was given no bearing for this film. But, hey, what are you going to do? You see fireworks at some particular point, which I guess, you know, signifies something. Summer in whatever regard. But anyway, I've been Fuego. Y'all have been Rad Status. And until next time, Fright fans, and the next bit of coverage coming at you from Fantastic Fest. Remember, stay scared.